So to first start off with, my name is Nathaniel Quist. I go by the letter Q, just pretty straightforward. I work with Palo Alto Networks with a small unit called Unit 42, primarily do threat intelligence research. We'll meet Jay Chen here. He's my co-presenter as well. Also, we're partners in crime when it comes to cloud threat, cloud intelligence research at Palo Alto Networks. Matt Chiotti is our boss. So if you have any questions, problems with us, take it to him. He'll figure it out. So, all right. So today we're going to be talking a little bit about our research we've looked at with vulnerabilities and threats that we find within the cloud. We're going to be talking about primarily misconfigurations. What's that? Oh, well, appreciate it. OK, thank you. If anybody else has any questions, please raise your hand. Throw something at me, and I'll slow down. So today's agenda is that we're going to be looking at misconfigurations primarily. Misconfigurations are a big part of our cloud environment, unfortunately. Jay's going to take over a little bit about the vulnerabilities and exploits that we've been looking at. We're going to talk about cloud patterns within the enterprise environment itself. We're going to have a couple use cases that we're going to look at, then some demos, and then we'll have question and answers. All right, any questions so far? Sound like a good agenda? Awesome. All right, so first up, misconfigurations. It's not a very sexy thing, but it's like really important because a lot of the issues that we find within our environment happen to do with misconfigurations. The title of our track is Identifying Antipatterns. Does anybody know what an anti-pattern is, just right offhand? Couple few of you? OK, fantastic. So an anti-pattern, just for throw it out there, is what are the patterns that we do in and of ourselves, like how we deploy systems, how we make systems in our environment. Those patterns are what mistakes we can make, and those patterns allow attackers to come in and identify those and then exploit them in the future. So you can think of in a threat research or in a security pattern, we actually look for the patterns that attackers make. We look for the patterns that their tools have, the way they use network traffic, and we use that to map them. The same can be said of us and how we build tools and how we make tools, and that gives us patterns and how we work. So those are our anti-patterns that we're looking after. Misconfigurations are a big part of that. So within our research, what Jay and I were looking at here is we wanted to find out where these patterns are lying. We kind of have a large caveat here. So cloud service providers, so you can think of like AWS, obviously, and those other ones that we won't talk about. Is the infrastructure itself that we write on, that IaaS, is actually secure. It's a very solid framework. It is definitely secure. But we're talking about when you, as a customer or client, put something on top of that infrastructure, what does that look like? What is the configuration of those systems? How do your instances, how do your Kubernetes, your clusters, how do your Docker systems, how are they actually working? And are those secure? And what we're kind of finding is that not so much. Okay, so whose issue is that? Has anybody seen the AWS shared responsibility metrics? Okay, good, awesome, more than the last one. So this is whose responsibility is it to build and make and configure these systems? Is it AWS's responsibility, or is it yours as a consumer's responsibility? So kind of running through this pretty quickly, you have the consumer, and your data obviously is your responsibility. You're putting the data into the environment, and you're using it. Okay? You have the platform and applications and access management to that data, and how you access that data is also the customer's responsibility, as well as the operating systems, the network and configuration firewall information that's going back and forth, also the client's responsibility. And then any client-side data that you have, the server-side encryptions, how you are actually going to access that data, and how you're going to, the network traffic that you have going from your environment for, like, say, on-prem up to the cloud. Again, how you access that information, how you secure that or encrypt it is your responsibility. Then it's AWS's responsibility. Think of like the hypervisor down into like the kernel of the system. So the compute capabilities, the actual, like, say, EC2 instance or Lambda or what those functionalities are. That's their responsibility to make sure that those systems are performing the way it's supposed to perform. The storage, so S3 buckets, things of that nature, that's their responsibility to make sure that those systems are actually secure. The databases and networking side, Route 53, all that fun stuff. Then you have the hardware and the specific regions, the availability zones, things of that nature. AWS controls all that stuff. So again, that's just the infrastructure. Everything else that threads on top of it, the applications that you're running, the code that you're deploying up into the cloud, that's all customer responsibility. And AWS doesn't have any control or insight. They can garner insight, but that's really up to the client and the consumer to modify that or to have that, to use it. All right, so this next slide is, before I do it, from a security perspective, this next slide actually scares me quite a bit, but it's also really good information to have to know where we came from. Jay and I created a report, it's called Entropy of Cloud, and it's about where we as a cloud are moving or what the trend of our cloud capability is. And these are a couple of statistics that we pulled from that. I wanted to have these all come out one at a time, but for some reason this swap didn't make that happen, so apologies for that. But when we looked at 18 months of cloud security reports, so we're going to be in the top left-hand corner with a 65% number. 65% of incidences and vulnerabilities that happened in all reporting of cloud happened because of misconfigurations. This could be a misconfigured S3 bucket. This could be an EC2 instance that had default configurations or default credentials or basic things in that environment. So just basic default configurations or a misconfiguration in general. So 65% of all cloud incidences reported were due to misconfiguration. We're going to go straight across the top to 56. 56% of organizations have SSH port 21 open and exposed to the public. This could be bad, this could be good, depending on how you actually use the system, but everybody knows that hopefully SSH is how you basically get into your system from a remote location, can access and administrate your system from somewhere else. Best practice typically is that you use SSH only when needed and then you turn it off, because attackers are also looking for SSH because they want to have administrative control of your systems as well, right? So 50% of organizations have this exposed. You're going to see a slide a little bit later but I have it hidden behind an authentication block, or I have to have credentials or something in order to access it, or SSH keys or something. May not be important because there's a lot of vulnerabilities also targeting SSH and Open SSH in particular. Now we're going to jump down. We're going to skip the top right one, and we're going to go down to 39. So 39% of organizations have RDP or port 3389 open to the internet. This is primarily Windows GUI remote desktop protocol. There really is no reason to have this exposed to the internet in any way because it's like a direct line GUI interface into your environment. It should only be used on an internal basis, things of that nature, but we're still finding that 39% of cloud organizations have this exposed, which kind of sucks. All right, 61, the next number here, 61% of organizations are still using TLS version 1.1. Does anybody want to use version TLS 1.1? How about 1.2 or 1.3, right? Those are the most, more recent, more public ones. But 61% of organizations are still, at least have this offering available. They haven't just deprecated it. A little fun fact about 1.1 is that it was deprecated in 2008 because it was found to be vulnerable to attack and compromise. All right, so kind of a bummer. And so the number one aspect of all of the attacks and incidents that we had in this environment, the number one reason was just for data leakage, right? So data was exposed. Reports came out, pretty heavily from about 2017 up until, even recently. You can still find it where, like 600 million, usernames or passwords were exposed. Capital One, right? It's a notable thing. A little bit different from misconfiguration, but again, just data is just free flowing out into the internet. All right. Any questions about these numbers, just real fast? All right. One question down here. How do we find organizations? Okay. Define an organization. Organization within our purview of how we're looking at our organizations within Palo Alto itself. We can define organizations that way. And we can also spread that out into specific network ranges, like within a specific network block. Primarily, the organization aspect came from our own tools, so Prisma Cloud. We were able to define these particular pieces with the violations that we find. All right. With that, I'm going to pass it over to Jay, and he's going to carry on here for a little bit.
Thank you, Q. So we are curious to find out what are the traditional application services deployed in the public cloud that are exposed to the internet. In particular, we are interested to find out what are the services that are not supposed to be exposed to the entire internet in public cloud. Why is it bad to expose this service to public cloud? These are the top 8 services that we identify. And why is it bad? Why malicious actors are after this service? First, because it is so easy to identify this type of service on the internet. You can use search engines such as Shodan or Census to identify the exposed service. And second, attacker also knows that these services are in a cloud service provider, specific cloud service provider, and there's a good chance that the infrastructure behind this service have high computational power. This is especially attractive to cryptojacking type of malware. So just not a good idea. Now let's go through a little bit more detail of each individual service. 4.2 million of SH services are exposed to the internet. This is kind of bad, as Q already mentioned. Although SH protocol is secure and mature, it is still too risky to expose it to the internet. Misconfiguration, a weak credential, or a newly discovered vulnerability can all lead to host compromise. A quick survey here. Raise your hand if you can still log in to one of the SH server using username and password enabled. Really? Nobody? That's pretty impressive. I still have a lot of servers that I log in using password because monkey1234 is just so easy. I don't need to copy my public key to different servers I use. But it's just not a good, it is just a good practice to only enable public key authentication. One of the interesting findings in our research is that 50% of the exposed SH servers in one of the major big cloud service provider have password login enabled. Not sure why, but that's the result we got. And this is really bad because we all know when you have password login enabled, it is vulnerable to brute force attack. And for the RDP, it's similar to SSH service. It is powerful and convenient, but just too risky to expose it to the entire internet. You never know when the next BlueKeep type of vulnerability will be discovered. By the way, BlueKeep is the vulnerability discovered early this year that impact all the Windows version all the way back to Windows 7 that was released 10 years ago. And for database such as MySQL, Postgres, or Oracle, typically these databases are only accessed by a very small amount of application servers. They should never be exposed to the internet. A whitelist should be created just for the server that need to access this database. And SMB as well. SMB protocol is designed for local file sharing. There's no reason to expose it to the entire internet. And again, you never know when the next Eternal Blue vulnerability will be discovered. Eternal Blue is the vulnerability that led to the ransomware WannaCry 2 years ago. So we just look at a bunch of services exposed to the internet in public cloud. We are also interested to see what are the vulnerabilities that this service expose. A big caveat here is that we found a lot of vulnerabilities exposed in public cloud, but almost all of these vulnerabilities are due to customer deployed application. Again, as Q has mentioned, cloud infrastructure itself is intrinsically secure. we identified 34 million vulnerabilities across multiple major cloud service providers. And out of the 34 vulnerabilities, 33 of them are actually 33 million of the vulnerabilities come from cloud compute instance, such as AWS EC2 or Azure virtual machine. So this again indicate that most of the vulnerabilities come from the customer deployed application, not from the cloud infrastructure. And another interesting finding is that 50% of all the vulnerability we found are 2 years or older, which means that this application have been deployed more than 2 years and nobody patched or even updated in the past 2 years. The top 5 vulnerabilities that we found in public cloud are all web application related. This makes sense because web applications are still the most common service exposed to the internet. This figure shows the age of the vulnerability that we identify in public cloud. In general, the number of the discovered vulnerabilities is increasing every year. We can also see from this figure, more and more vulnerabilities are discovered every year. And because this research was done in mid-2019, the number in 2019 is not really accurate. If we redo the same experiment again in 2020, we expect the number in 2019 to be double. The takeaway here is that more and more applications are being deployed in public cloud, and more vulnerabilities are being discovered on these applications, which also means that attack surface to the public cloud attack surface of the public cloud, all the public cloud service providers is continuously increasing. This figure shows the number of hosts in public cloud with vulnerabilities. Our scanner identified around 18, our vulnerability identified around 18 million exposed hosts in public cloud. And we found that around 3.2 million of these exposed hosts have at least one vulnerabilities. And about 1 million hosts have at least 10 vulnerabilities or above. If we just look at the number, like 3 million hosts have at least one vulnerability, and 1 million hosts have 10 or more vulnerability, it kind of looks bad, but when you look at the percentage, it actually gives us some hope. If the first bar on the very left, it means this is the number of the host with no vulnerability, vulnerability-free host. It's like 75% of the exposed, 75% of the exposed hosts actually have no vulnerability at all, and most of the vulnerability, like the 34 million vulnerability we identify, are clustered in 25% of the hosts exposed in public cloud. Now let's look at the cloud security landscape from another angle. Let's look at the exploit development. Cloud-hosted applications share the same vulnerability as the on-prem hosted application. It doesn't matter where you deploy your application. Whenever there's an application, there must be some vulnerabilities. And we are interested in our research. We are interested to find out how fast exploits are developed for a newly discovered vulnerabilities. The left pie chart shows the statistic in 2018. In 2018, 35% of the exploits are developed and published within a week. And 11% of the exploits are developed and published even before the vulnerabilities are disclosed. These are the zero-day vulnerabilities. These are the vulnerabilities that you cannot even patch before the attackers start to attack you. So, kind of scary. The right figure shows the historical trend of the exploit development from 2014 to 2019. In 2014, in average, each exploit is published 137 days or 6.5 months after an vulnerability is disclosed. This number dropped to 62 days or 2 months in 2017. And in the first half of 2019, this number is 6 days. This is very scary, meaning that the time window that we need to patch our system now is less than a week. 6 days only, and I don't know I cannot predict what this number will become in 2020 or 2022. I assume probably it can only drop so much, cannot be negative. And the big takeaway here is that we need to patch our system, our application, quickly and more frequently. 5 or 6 years ago, it may not be feasible or possible to ask a system admin to patch a vulnerable application immediately within several days. However, today, with the maturity of the agile software development and the maturity of the DevOps toolchain, I think this is doable. We can patch much quicker and much more frequently. Now I will give back to Q.
Thanks, Jay. All right. So, kind of scary numbers, right? I mean, there's things that I think that I mean, we're all here part of a development conference, right? To talk about getting services up faster, getting more people connected quicker, making it more secure at the same time. But in the field, we're still seeing that they're still lagging behind a little bit. So I mean, even though we're talking about CI/CD and we're talking about shift left and putting security as early into the development cycle as we possibly can, I mean, you can think of attackers doing the exact same thing. I mean, they have their Jira boards that they're like, running through Kanban cycles, being like, hey, they just released this new service. Maybe we can find some exploits in it. They're doing the same things, right? So we're kind of fighting the same battle from two different sides. One of those groups that are doing this is called the ROC group. The reason I focused on ROC is because ROC has some very interesting attack tendencies and attack capabilities that they've been working with, and they've actually increased in sophistication really quickly. So a little bit about ROC here. They first started out in 2016 is when they first began their operations. They were very novice. In the security industry, we'd call them script kiddies. They just stole code from these sources and those sources and smash them together into some sort of feasible Python script and then throw it up there and hope somebody clicks on it and starts doing something bad. They got the name Iron Group because the Iron ransomware that they were using at that time, just called Iron. They'd just request a little bit of Bitcoin or Monero, and then off they go. They weren't even cloud focused at this time, not even remotely. They actually focused a little bit more on Android than they did anything else. But in 2008, they started touching cloud, and they started looking a little bit more sophisticated. They started realizing there's a lot of vulnerabilities exposed to this global world that we have, this global interconnected cloud, and they started making a little bit more money crypto mining than doing ransomware. So they released a lot of crypto mining operations and made a little bit of money, and then they started focusing on how do we actually maintain access to cloud environments. So they actually started developing rootkits. They started developing like persistence inside cloud environments, and then they got the nickname of ROC because one of the tools that they used actually used that call-out name was an email address that they went through. I'm not going to go through all the details, but it was an email address that said ROC at a specific domain, and that's what that tool was registered to beacon back to. It was kind of interesting, but that didn't really start until 2008. So it's just what, like 2 years at most. So what they do in this last year, they used that money that they acquired from crypto mining, and they actually started perfecting their tool, perfecting their tradecraft, and they started actually now going into Lua instead of just using straight Python scripts that were unencrypted and unencoded and they're just laying on a system. They're actually now using Lua scripts that they're actually obfuscating. They're actually starting to embed their code deeper into systems to where they're maintaining access into things like containers and then your EC2 host. They're actually now starting to use container escape exploits in their environment. So they're actually becoming more and more sophisticated and mature in their environment. The latest tool that they have actually has proxying capabilities, so they can actually now proxy channels, proxy communications from one cloud environment through other cloud environments to maintain secrecy in their tool set. Another interesting thing about ROC themselves is that they're the first cloud organization that we've seen, our cloud attacking group, that actually specifically targets security tools and disables them and removes them from the system so they, again, can maintain access without being detected. So again, having that capability to get into a system, maintain persistence in that system, and then make sure they're not detected is their key tradecraft. It's up to kind of us to how do we maintain visibility, how can we see what processes are happening in those environments so we can kind of root and shuffle them out. So kind of pulling kind of all this back together within the number of vulnerabilities that we have, how fast we can make exploits, they've kind of ridden that wave. There's a few groups, but ROC has been pretty successful riding that wave to get access to these systems. And we can see that by some of these statistics. Again, some of these statistics are kind of scary. 28.1% of organizations that we're able to monitor have communications with or to back and forth communication with ROC known infrastructure. So we're looking at about a third of this room. So just take one of these columns and then you're communicating with ROC domains. And they do that specifically through old exploits. Primarily, most of their exploits are 2015. They have a couple from 2015, a couple from 2016. They just aren't patched, like Redis, Redis servers that just aren't patched. Active MQ domains, Adobe struts, a lot of HTTPD sort of vulnerabilities that they just take advantage of. So again, patching, very, 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 very important, trying to get that faster. Next thing is 22% of that 28%, or 2% of the whole total that we looked at, had sustained beaconing activity within that environment. So that means ROC is actually staying on that environment for longer, up to 6 months of what we've seen so far. And that's like repeatedly every 15 minutes they're beaconing back and like performing their crypto mining operations. So kind of a fun stat there, right? Oops. Oh, there we go. And we also find is that if you're connecting to at least one ROC domain, there's an 83% chance that you'll communicate with at least other ROC domains, at least one other one. So again, attempt. So if you say, hey, I have this weird IP address that's communicating, let's go ahead and block that. Well, they've got 9 others that they'll maintain persistence with. So again, they're maturing as fast as we're developing. So something to be aware of. So as I mentioned earlier, both Jay and I are part of Prisma Cloud. We're also part of Unit 42, which is the Palo Alto's Threat Intel Group. And what Palo Alto's Threat Intel Group does is we have something called ADAP Viewer. This is our playbook viewer. And what we do is we create and we take the different tools, the different groups that we see, so different APT groups, like anybody heard of like oil rig or WannaCry operations or Sidewinder or any of these? We do is we break their operations out based upon the campaigns that they do, and then we can take that information and we can deliver that to you via Styx taxi feed. You can ingest that directly into your tool, whatever it is that you're developing, and then your system can either alert, detect, or hopefully prevent that operation from happening. This is free of charge. Just go use it, please. And then you can obviously come talk to us afterwards, and if you want to have more interesting, more advanced information, or as soon as we discover things, have that rotated in. That's helpful. So that's, again, if you don't have Palo Alto firewalls or things of that nature, automatically blocking this stuff to begin with, you can directly integrate that code into your platform. So pretty cool. All right, so we're going to jump into some use case sort of styles, and we're going to have a demo as well that we're going to share with you all. All right, so the first use case I want to go over here is bad network connections. So obviously, I like network connections. I think NetFlow is all right still. It'd be nice if we had full packet capture across everything. That would be amazing. But we're using this. So using Prisma Cloud, we are able to identify network connections that are that you may want to block within your environment, or at least alert that these things are happening in your particular cloud infrastructure. So and then have that functionality be able to elevate towards the top of your alert system, so your SOC isn't getting alert fatigue and all that stuff, so we can more securely and faster remediate these operations. Prisma Cloud is automatically integrated with GCERT, which is our global threat response team. So the information that we find, like say the information I find within ROC, automatically goes to GCERT, and then that will auto-magically get populated into our firewalls and your PAN OS, and then stop that environment, stop that activity from continuing farther. We can also use your selected threat intel list, like our Styx taxi feed or some of the other Styx taxi feeds threat intel services that are available in the public. Come talk to me afterwards. There's a few of them that are really helpful. All right, we're also going to have a conversation about Palo Alto, or so the Prisma Cloud's query response language, so you can actually drill down into how this, how you can specifically find interesting aspects. Jay's going to cover that demo for us. All right, so we're going to just head on over to the demo machine. Oops. Sorry about that. There we go. All right, so video, because live demos are killing. All right, so this is the Prisma plane that we have here on the left-hand side. You can see that we have different boards that we're going to go through. I'm going to send you, or we're going to look specifically at the security operations board. This is a quick little board that we have that'll give you like kind of a Kibana-like interface. It's not Kibana, but it pulls out a few good pieces of information. You can customize all of this to see what you want to see. Highlight the fact here that you have different protocols, so you can see how much of your traffic is web, 443, 80, 8040. It's a weird port. Might want to know what that's doing. Quickly see what are your top policy violations that you have in your environment, and like what time that's actually happening. So it's very helpful. You can see here that about noon o'clock, you had 20 alerts happened, primarily from events. Then you had about audit events, and you have configuration data. You can also see like which buckets, what is the top violations. You can see here that we had exposed SS8 or S3 buckets moving through. This is actually where it gets kind of interesting, where I kind of like these things. You can see here that what are the top internet connective applications that you have in your environment. So we have about 82.5 megabytes of data moving over RDP. You have about 23 megabytes of information moving SSH out to the external environment. To me, that's kind of, why would you have those things? To be, drill you in onto that. Right here we have Bitcoin. So the port 8332 or 8333 happening in your environment, you might want to know when those things are happening. And you give a click on that one, it'll tell you exactly which systems that you have that are actually communicating with these two, what's that protocol. You can see here that we have an at bastion AZ2A and then an AZ2B. happening. You can kind of hover over that a little bit, and you can see that you have inbound traffic of about 3.8 megabytes on both sides, but the one on the left here, your AZ2A, has a lot more information moving through. So why is that? So just go ahead and give it a click. Watch the little bubble go for a little bit. And then you can see what is connecting to it. You can see here that we have some suspicious IP information. You have AWS IPs, internet IPs, the different IP addresses, both internal and external, for that particular system. You can see what tags that you've assigned to that particular system. And you can click down here on the networks. You can actually see what are your security groups that you actually have assigned for that environment. You have it's communicating to the 10.1 address. And you can also see here, it's open up to the internet. So this particular system can communicate with anything. It's got 0 and all on the ports. Probably not a good thing. I would hope not. Thankfully, AWS does give you warnings like, this is exposed, are you sure? It's amazing how many clients are actually like, oh, sure, I'll just go ahead and click through that. You can see here that it's had some traffic with Mongo databases from what is considered a suspicious IP, so like those ROC IPs that I've said. These get put into there, and then those will actually, any communication with those will be alerted in that particular aspect. The same with the internet IP addresses. You can see here, this is where the Bitcoin is coming in. We've had about 110 megabytes of data moving through to these particular Bitcoin IP addresses. We can drill down into that environment, and then we can see the source and destination aspects of that. You can also see a kind of a timeline view of when that frequency is occurring. Some of these, again, this is demo data, so it's kind of flat and static. I wish it would be like major spike, but this is what we have. So you can see how much traffic you actually see, where it's coming to, where it's going from. Very helpful based upon that particular data pattern. So MongoDB has about 5 megabytes moving back and forth on this particular system. Again, so it gives you some more insight, clarity into what your network's actually looking at. Could be very helpful. You can classify these, you can filter these by classification. So you can see here that Bitcoin 8332 is communicating with these particular IP addresses. You can do risk IQ based, or you can do some passive DNS lookups to see what those IP addresses are. And you can also move those into your particular environment and how much data that you have moving through those. Pretty helpful there. How much time we have? We got plenty of time. There's another demo that this is kind of move over to here. Once it goes. Oh yeah, no, I wanted to, this section here. Within the alert summary, so Palo Alto is, or the Prisma Cloud is actually based upon what compliance policies that your organization wants to uphold, and then it'll tell you where those particular policies are falling short, or what you have in here. So they're sorted by severity, based upon high, medium, low, and then which standards they're applying to. Interesting aspect of this, if you want to click on the top one here, which is a suspicious IP address communicating with an internal host. You get a little bit more information on it, like when it happened, how long it took, what system it happened on, what region that particular thing is occurring in. Then you can also do things like alert rules. These are kind of cool from a SOC perspective, which is my background. You can create this to where when Prisma Cloud sees that traffic happening, it can instantly create a Jira ticket. You can create a SIM ticket, push it to the SIM for notification. You can push it to a Slack notification, because we all live in Slack and you'd want to know about those things when they happen. Very handy pieces of information there. And then Prisma Cloud will also integrate with, obviously Demisto and any of your SOAR applications, so you can actually take remediation aspects on that as well. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to move out and kind of see how we can see this data from kind of a slightly different angle. If you don't like these kind of charts, I always kind of like this because everybody likes a map. It's going to load down here in just a second. There it goes. So you can kind of see what it is that we're looking at here. This is all the information that your particular region or your organization is talking to based upon the geo standards that it's working at. You have your light pink and your dark red there being for internet and slightly suspicious traffic. Go ahead and click on one of those things that sounds interesting. I'm going to click on the United States and Florida. Florida is very suspicious. So I'm going to go ahead and you can see what data is going through here. You can see where it's coming from, what type of information that you have in that environment, protocols that it's using. Go ahead and give it a click. You got this nice query language at the top, which Jay will go over here in just a little bit. But when you see that, as soon as it pops up, here it goes. There we go. Gives you a nice little handy-dandy graph. And you can see that you have some suspicious IP addresses communicating with app LB. In the background, app LB and app bastion 2ZA that we looked at earlier are actually, they share the same database. So kind of interesting. Again, you can go ahead and click on this. You can see actually the traffic that's moving through those particular systems, and then you can use that for your SOC to alert on specific information, that what IP addresses they're coming from, what type of communications they have, and to and from destinations. Very helpful. And then you have a little fancy-dancy graph of what time that actually occurred. All right. So kind of fun, right? I mean, helpful information. It's nice to see a visual aspect that goes through that. And you can double click on any of those, and if you wanted to expand upon that, it'll automatically open up for you. So, all right, and with that, I'm going to hand it over to Jay, and he's going to carry us through the last of the demo.
In the next two examples, I'm going to show you how to use the Prisma resource query language to perform threat hunting and investigation. Prisma resource query language is a structured language very similar to SQL. We can use it to query the cloud resources such as the configuration, network activities, and API event. The first example here, I'm going to show you how I use the resource query language to identify malicious inbound traffic from malicious inbound traffic to our cloud resources. This is a network event. So as I mentioned, there are three types of the resource that we can query. This is the network type of event. And we are interested in the traffic coming from the internet. So I choose the public network. And I'm interested in the traffic coming from malicious IP. We keep track a set of IP that are malicious in our internally. And click query, we have one result. But we can adjust the time window a little bit to cover longer time frame. In this case, I cover the entire month, October. Now we have more results here. So we can add more condition into the query to narrow down our investigation. Let's add another condition to restrict the source only to a subset of regions. Suppose we are only interested in the malicious IP coming from China and Russia. Now, it should return us fewer results and narrow down our investigation. Click the search button. And we have a little bit fewer results, but still a lot. So I want to add more condition to narrow down our my threat hunting. Now I want to restrict the destination to my cloud resources located in AWS California or AWS Virginia. Click search. Now I have only 6 results. I will add one less condition to further narrow down our query to only destination, to only the cloud resources with known vulnerabilities. This is one of my favorite conditions. because it integrates the alert with the query language. So click search. Now we only have 3 results. It's greatly reduced, narrow down the alert that as a security analyst need to look after. And again, we can click on any of the links to see more detail. In the next example, I'm going to show you how to use the resource query language to investigate an unusual user activity. So right now we have a list, we have multiple unusual user activities. I'm going to just pick one and dig into it. In this particular alert, the account was used to perform some IAM activities which it never did before. This is why it raised an alert. We are only interested, when doing the investigation, we are only interested to see the malicious or suspicious activities. So I can add a condition in the query language to restrict to only the event that we are interested in. So I only want to see the IAM related activities. Again, using the autocomplete feature of query resource query language is very helpful and easy. Now it only shows me the event related to IAM activities. It is still a little bit too much. I want to add another condition to restrict to only the account update or account creation event. So again, I can add these two conditions to the query. Now I get smaller dot, meaning fewer results. So I hope by now you can get some idea or get some feeling of how powerful the resource query language is. And as a security analyst, it really helped me investigate and remediate the issues much quicker. Okay, this is the end of demo. I will now switch back to the presentation mode. So what we just demoed are few important features in Prisma Cloud. However, Palo Alto Networks does provide a more comprehensive tool set to protect all the cloud workload. Prisma Access establishes a secure connection between users and service in the cloud or on the internet. All the traffics are closely inspected and controlled. Prisma SaaS is a cloud service security broker that sits between users and cloud service. All the communication between all the API queries between users and the cloud service are being inspected by Prisma SaaS, and a very granular security control can also be enforced to restrict the API that each individual user can query the cloud service. VM series is a virtualized next-generation firewall in cloud. When all the traffic in the cloud are routed through this virtualized firewall in the cloud, it can detect the application in your cloud environment. It can enforce application layer firewall policy, and it can also detect and prevent malware being sent to or downloaded in cloud environment. This is the end of our talk, and thank you again for being here. Thank you for staying until the end of session, and thank you again for staying until the last session of the day, at least in this room. Q and I will stay here if you have any questions.